Welcome to RevOps Review, our podcast, and I'm here today with our CEO at New, Mark Walker. I'm a co-founder of New. My name's Kate McCullough, and we are joined by Tyler Sloat, who's the CFO of Freshworks, to talk about why some SaaS metrics are really, really hard to get to, why some matter more than others, how you need to think about systems in adjacency to metrics. So kicking off, Tyler, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Well, first, Kate, Mark, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this with you guys. As you mentioned, Tyler Sloat, I'm the CFO here at Freshworks. I've been the CFO. I've been here for 3 years. I came on as CFO really with the job of coming into a company that was really already kind of at scale and just had an incredible go-to-market motion with great products and getting us ready to kind of take that the next level of maturity in terms of from a corporate side and take it public. So we went public about a year and a half ago on a NASDAQ and have been doing well. Our products, really are focused on helping our customers help their customers. So we have CX products, and then on the inverse, helping our customers help their employees. And so Freshservice is our ITSM product that is kind of playing in that squarely in that mid-market, low enterprise space and doing really, really well. We have Freshdesk, one of the, enterprise-grade customer support software, and we have a CRM product as well. That is our third product. The company was a U.S. company, we founded out of India. And really, when we talk about metrics, is really interesting because we have 3 go-to-market motions. An inbound motion, outbound motion, and partner motion. We're selling from SMBs all the way up to enterprises and doing it on a global scale. So there's lots of stuff to look at. I came to Freshworks from Zuora, where I was a CFO for just under 10 years. Kind of joined them when there were around 40 employees, and then we built that up and took it public. And Zuora, essentially subscription management software, really centered around billing primarily, and being, positioned as kind of this cloud in between, after CRM, before financials. Freshworks is my 5th private company. And really my first foray into SaaS was at Siebel Systems back, kind of 2002, 2003. The inventor of CRM, arguably, where they saw this little company, Salesforce, coming up. And so they bought a company called Upshot with a partnership with IBM. And they asked me to run, I was there and doing sales and marketing stuff with Siebel, and I just gotten there out of business school, and they asked me to go run finance for CRM on demand. And so we really learned a lot there. We really learned about, how different SaaS is and subscription-based models are from perpetual-based models. Outside of that, been an advisor to a lot of small companies, been on a couple of boards, and really kind of had a mix of hardware and software over the years, including running finance and ops for a hardware encryption business that we sold to NetApp, and then being a controller of NetApp for a while. But that's my background. Really happy to be here.
Thank you for that. So you worked with a diversity of products, pricing, different models, up market, down market. So you're a perfect person to ask this question, which is, what in your mind, if you were to kind of boil the ocean, are the most important SaaS metrics that finance teams should really focus on? And that's a broad question, so take it any direction that you'd like.
Yeah, I think, whether they're SaaS or not, we'll get to SaaS, but just metrics in general. I think finance's job, the CFO's job, is to kind of, number one, governance and compliance, and that's kind of table stakes these days. But second is really in my opinion, to run the business model for the company and help the company, number one, understand and then action on their business model. Business model is not a budget, right? It's really the levers on what drives the business, whether it's growth or efficiencies or whatnot. To do that, number one, you got to have kind of ways to help guide your management team and the company along in terms of understanding the data and then being able to action on it. So when I really think about it, it's like, first of all, the most important thing is whatever metric you choose, and I'll get into what I think are the most important. Number one, has to be available. That it has to be something that you can consistently provide back to the business in a consistent fashion. It has to be measured the same way over and over again. The second, it has to be understandable, meaning that if you're going to go tell the business or your management team partners that this isn't a metric that's important, you've got to be able to demonstrate why it's important and why this is fundamental to your business and how it's going to drive the results you want. And then third, it has to be actionable, meaning that if it's understandable, it's like, how can we then change behavior within an organization to actually optimize for that metric in particular? So I just kind of gave the foundation of how I think about the underlying constructs of whatever metric you choose. For any SaaS business, I would argue, number one, annual recurring revenue is the umbrella that is over everything, and is really the driver for the business. The kind of formula for ARR is pretty simple. You have entering ARR, which is annual recurring revenue, plus new ACV, which is annual contract value, minus churn, which is, kind of the decrement against your existing recurring base. And churn, can include downsell, or deletion, which is a customer fully leaving you, plus or minus any FX changes. And FX is important because if you are selling your service in multiple currencies, there's got to be a mark to market on your ARR base that's in those foreign currencies over time. And it has to kind of match what you would expect to get revenue from in the future. And then, the combination of all those things equals your exiting ARR. That incremental, the stuff in between of beginning and ending, is kind of your delta ARR for any period that you want to measure. And that's really the driver of your business. If you are a subscription-based business, which every SaaS business kind of is. Underneath that then is, okay, how do you then drive it? If that's the measure ARR, like how do you run a business model around it? I'm a big proponent of kind of what we would call a subscription business model, which, breaks your costs into three components. One is your recurring costs, which is, what I would argue what you spend to run the business, which is COGS, G&A, and R&D. And there's arguments around R&D as, hey, does that get you new ARR, or does it, essentially get your existing base? I would say, hey, whatever you're building today is going to your existing customers from a SaaS perspective, and is what's going to help you keep those customers. What you're building tomorrow is really hopefully for new customers or upsell and things like that. And so that's why I just like to simplify it. And you can argue either one. I just like to simplify everything. And so I would put all of R&D into recurring expense. Then you have your go-to-market expense, which is your sales, marketing, customer success typically. And then you have your one-time expense, and that's usually professional services for any SaaS business, which is really around implementation. And you kind of put that on the side. So if you think about your recurring expense, your go-to-market expense, you kind of break those into two buckets. You want to come up with goals around spend on your recurring expense, and then you have a decision criteria in your go-to-market expense on how much do you spend of your ARR base to go to market to grow that base. And then you say, okay, I would make that decision based on how efficient that spend is. And so there's a metric around efficiency, which I like, which is your growth efficiency index, which essentially is kind of like a magic number or CAC ratio. It is a very simple measure, and I like simple because you can repeatedly, it's available, number one, and it's understandable, and it's actionable. And so your GEI is essentially your go-to-market spend over your delta ARR that you get in any period. And the lower the number, the better. So the more ARR you get, right, brings your bottom up and your go-to-market spends on the top. You can measure that. The reason I like that is that, number one, you can get that available internally, and you can kind of break it down into, as deep as you want. The deeper you go, the more allocations you have, and it gets less perfect. But you can also look at it across SaaS companies that have available data, which is public companies, because you can use their subscription revenue as a proxy for ARR, and then you can use their sales and marketing expense that they're reporting from a GAAP perspective.
Yeah, you're benchmarking effectively against other companies.
Correct.
And then how does that translate? And we've talked some about this before, about how metrics are internally or externally consumed, whether that's by your internal execs or external investors, et cetera. How does this help with that in your mind?
So I remember an anecdote at Zuora. We and arguably Zuora, kind of the time there, we created a lot of these metrics in this subscription business model, and then an operating framework that we call Padre, that really says, okay, if you have a business model construct, how do you then inject that into your business to actually drive the business forward? And Padre stands for pipeline, acquire, deploy, run, expand. But to say, okay, how do you start with something like this with your management team, and how do you get them started on it? I remember we had going into kind of this budgeting process, which, over time you would want to do away with a budgeting process. If you run this model, you just keep running it forward. When we walked into this meeting, it was pretty early, and we had 2 pizzas. So actually, it was 2 pies. We had an apple pie and a cherry pie. We literally brought in 2 pies. And then we broke the management team into 2 groups, and we put all the recurring expense people on one side, and we put all the go-to-market expense people on the other side. And we said, hey guys, here you go. We've decided that we're going to spend, let's call it, I'm making up numbers here, 60% of ARR on recurring expense, right? Your 60% is capped. You guys figure out how to go spend it, right? And that's that pie. That's that cherry pie. There is no more pie. That's it. So you guys decide how many pieces each group gets, but that's it.
Yeah.
On the go-to-market side, we said, hey, we could, if we're spending 60% over here on recurring expense, which is kind of high because we're a young company, and so over time you want to get that much lower. We said, okay, technically we'd have 40% left if we want to break even, but we're willing to lose some money depending on efficiency. So here's another 60%, right, of the ARR. So we're essentially going to 120% of ARR, so technically we're going to be burning capital. But we said, okay, it probably makes sense to build the ARR base if we can do it efficiently. Of that other 60%, hey, go-to-market group, that's all you get to spend. So you need to come back to us and tell us, hey, is it better with spending on reps? Is it better spending on customer success people? Is it better spending on marketing dollars? You figure out 2 pies, but the pies cannot get bigger. You can't add slices, right? And you can choose not to spend. In fact, the next exercise we went through is like everybody decided what to spend. And we said, well, here's the deal. It feels like we're really efficient on the GEI side. And it feels like if we had more, we would invest it. But we're really capped on how much cash we have and how much we want to burn. So we went back to the recurring expense guide. We told you we could spend 60%. But if I told you gave 10% to the go-to-market people today, I'll give you 30% back 6 months from now, right? And guess what? When you give them your 10%, you get to hold them accountable to grow ARR. So that 50% there, that 60% we told you about, it's now such a bigger number because the ARR got bigger. You get to spend more now. So you're willing to effectively get them alone, right? It makes sense. Yeah.
So I think that's a really great sort of almost a parable for what so many companies are going through right now, right? Because they have this balancing between, the amount you can spend in a capital constricted environment is now probably fixed, right? It's totally tied to your growth rate. And so being able to study that and understand it and be able to say, well, actually, if we were to take away a little bit from over here, spend it over here, what metrics would have to change in order to make that true? And therefore to build the business case for, are you prepared to do that? What occurred to me when you were saying that was you have to be at a fairly significant level of maturity to stably do that, right? Because if you were to run these metrics in, I'm just going to go to absurd, but if you run in a seed company, an A company, a B company, and we can go through the different stages, I've always seen that the level of metric maturity changes because there's a limit, there's a bottom limit to how few people you can have doing certain things, right? So you're either doing it or you're not doing it. If you're doing it, your metrics kind of get screwed up. So what do you think of on the way there, can you do Padre like right from and GDI right from the beginning? Or is there a sequence of different metrics that become the most important thing, and then this other thing becomes that you add into it as you grow a company from A to a public company?
You can do Padre from the very beginning. I do think it is harder. I say that because I advise another company that they do Padre and they have done it from startup. And when I say run Padre, like even to the extent that your board presentations are presented in a Padre framework, and your quarterly updates are on Padre. And it's really just a framework. Like, hey, what did we do for pipe? What was our goal on pipe and how do we hit, acquisition, which is ACV, deployed, if we have an implementation model. And so you can definitely do that. And I think it's more of an organizational metric at that point in time, because clearly if you're just starting your company, that R is kind of where you would kind of put, so Padre actually has an addendum, which is product, people, and money. So we call it Padre PPM. And that product, that first P is really where you're going to focus the most, right? And if you're a startup, you're going to be like, well, I've got people and I got money. I got to make my burn is cash is king. I got to be super careful and I got to make sure I'm building product. At the same time, you're probably talking about, hey, do we have our first beta customers? And at that point, you're not really thinking ACV yet. You're thinking about product market fit. It's not a bad exercise to have the framework, and even if those buckets are empty, it's like, okay, when do we want to fill them, right? And having a goal that then it'll be great, goal from if you had one salesperson or you had a CEO who was sales minded to be able to engage with the product folks and say, hey guys, I'm here ready to sell. We already have the vision. We know what we're building. You just need to deliver it to me. And here's what we need to get those first couple of customers. It just provides for conversation in my mind.
A lot of companies that we run into have kind of, in my view, shot themselves in the foot for being able to do this for two reasons. One is we run into companies who are running completely unconnected processes, right? So trying to get the uniformity, like being able to measure things in a reliable way is not really there. Typically, we see this in people who've taken spreadsheets way too far for way too long, and it's a lot of that allocation activity that you were talking about that makes things unreliable is actually the normal operating operating. But then the other situation we run into is where they have implemented systems, but those systems are completely different, and the definition of those metrics in the different systems is actually different, right? So MRR reported by their ERP doesn't match the anything that you could calculate from the CRM system, and doesn't match maybe even what's going on in the billing system. That these are disconnected. What do you think is the time? First of all, do you agree that that's an impediment to getting to where you want to go? And what advice would you give to companies about when's it a good time to get your house in order? Do you wait till you're, is there a certain stage where you go, okay, now get your house in order? Or do you advise your young companies, look, get your house in order, presume you're going to be successful and this is going to become a worse and worse problem? What are your thoughts there?
So I'm a big believer in data and how data can drive the business. But that data is only as good as the quality of that data. So then I'm a big believer in taking things down to the micro, which is every transaction, and establishing rules from the very beginning around, okay, what is the definition of ARR, right? And this is, it could be a relatively subjective thing. I've learned this over time through, stuff that's happened in businesses. I remember at Seaboy, I mentioned that, I went over to Seaboy on Demand. We're talking about a company who lives and dies by the $50 to $75 million deal at the end of each quarter, and then they're trying to run a business that's at 75 users, $75 per user per month, right? It's like, how do you have this world within this broader world? I remember I had this spreadsheet that was just massive Excel spreadsheet with just so many macros in it because we had this joint partnership with IBM, like all the elements of what the business, all we could think about. And then at the end of each period, you're like, okay, how did that do against our model and our plan? I'm like, oh, this is tough because there's so many variables, yet there was nothing that was rising to the top as the most important thing. That's the only thing we want to focus on. And all I could say is that you build those spreadsheets, I can guarantee they're going to be wrong, right? And you don't even know why they're wrong because there's just so much going on. So the simplification is huge. The data at the micro is huge. So as you're closing each deal, this is not too early. It's never too early. In fact, you should I would already do it from the very beginning, right? Lock down your data, lock down your fields, lock down your definitions, and really start reporting on actually what's based on those definitions. I think one of the biggest mistakes though that people would make, or even finance people in my chair, they become way too rigid. I mean, like, we have these definitions, we've got to do this. I'm like, wait, that doesn't mean you're not going to take the funky deal or the one that has risk, right? You're a brand new company. You got to do this kind of thing. However, just report on it accurately.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Even as the CFO today, I would think I'm relatively conservative that I want to report like a more conservative view of the business, but that doesn't mean we have stuff going on that's, funky. It just means that we report it accurately. And then you can make decisions on what you want to do, on a deal to deal basis or things like that. It's just, report it accurately.
A great question on that is that it's not just about finance labeling and data definition. That interacts deeply with the sales side of the house. And I'd be curious, how you think about that early, and what are the definitional requirements you have, as well as sort of governance and data quality? What are the things that you look at across that continuum of sales to finance to make sure this happens? And it's not just finance trying to triage at the end, which is what we see a lot.
Agreed. And also, I would say finance can't act in a silo, right? We're not an ivory tower. And so collaboration and communication, super important. The collaboration is agreeing with everybody. And that's why I think that those metrics I said at the very beginning, right? Number one, they got to be available. They got to be understandable, and they got to be actionable. That understandable piece is all about alignment. So if you're going to say, hey, management team and exec team, I think this is how we should run the business, right? I think these are the most important things for us. It could be ARR, and everybody should agree, yep, that's important. What about net dollar retention? Do we agree that's super important? Do we agree GEI is super important? That alignment, you have to get that consensus, because if you don't have that consensus, then it doesn't matter. Because your head of sales will go do what they want to do, right? Your head of ops might go do what they want to do. It's okay. But once you have that consensus and you agree and you say, okay, this is how we're going to define things, then you have an establishment that you can actually build into systems. Once you do that, then it's okay, the actionable piece is how do we motivate behavior to drive for the optimal results on those metrics? I am a big believer that, say, in sales comp, you get what you pay for, right? And if you are going to you're going to design comp plans that allow for certain behaviors, they're going to take those behaviors and go. And you can't blame the field for doing that.
Right.
So,
yeah, in fact, I think that's one of the hardest things that you get. The hardest things that I've historically seen about motivating sales teams to be team players in the running the company part of the business is that the comp models tend to cause them to be incented to engage in either bad behavior that's actually, ethically questionable behavior, which is like a misclassification problem where people will classify things in a way that maximizes their comp. But the more common thing I'm seeing, because most of the bad salespeople get weaned out, it's the expedient behavior that fries the metrics. The classic example being using discounting to truncate a term to get the price right on a you're upselling somebody, but only for the rest of half the year. So somehow a rep doesn't want to wait for the approval, so they just put a discount through to fix it, and the manager approves it because they just got to get the deal booked. But from the finance team's looking at this data and they go, that looks to them like 50% of the ARR. It looks like you just sold a year for half the price, right? Or something like that. It's that governance, incenting sales to do the governance activity properly and making it easy for them that I've always, I wonder what your feedback is on that. It's not generally people are trying to progress with the company. They're just trying to get things done, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why the rules are really important, right? So when you have your comp plans, you have the right rules around your comp plans, then again, it doesn't mean you don't say no to every single one of those deals. It just means that you're not going to comp on it if you have the right rules there. And shockingly or not shockingly, when you make these rules and you abide by them, typically you get the behaviors that you want. But when you allow for some type of leniency, right, within your rules, oftentimes reps are going to use everything in their tool bag to go close a deal. And again, you can't blame them for it. I think one of the best examples, it's a very similar to one you just described, Mark. So I got to Zuora and we had two problems. Again, this is a long time ago, this is 10 years ago. One problem came about an hour after I got there. And it was that we actually missed our cash number in about, this is probably like 3 quarters after I got there. And it was in the quarter and it was really about collections. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And when I looked at it, what the behavior was at the time, because we had an implementation, it was pretty standard to allow the reps to close a deal and attach like a 3-month extra stub to the first year. right? And so there's two things that was wrong with that. One, they're still calling it ARR, right? So I sell a $120K deal, but it has a 15-month first term. And the whole notion was, wow, the customer would be like, I don't get to use it for 3 months because we have implementation. And this is pretty early. I mean, it's 13 years ago, so SaaS wasn't super prolific. And the arguments out there was like, no, you get access to the system and all this kind of stuff. So we were allowing reps to close, and we're giving full quota credit, right? And then what I should have known, but we didn't figure about 3 to 4 quarters later, the cash doesn't come in. It's like, well, of course, because that next bill doesn't go out for 15 months. We had sold enough that we had pushed out enough customers 1 full quarter. We're like, wow, okay, this is dangerous. Now, the revenue side is fine. You put it in, you recognize over 15 months. So it's like we're compliant there. Now, the ARR reporting, we're probably off. So the difference between our ARR and our revenue. What do we do? So the first thing we did is like, okay, we can still sell those deals, but guess what, guys? We're actually going to record them accurately, and you'll get accurate quota credit. So that same deal, you'll get 12/15ths, right? You can sell it, but you get 12/15ths credit. Now, we did take everything away though. I did say, hey, when it comes up for renewal, that is now an upsell, because we did 12/15ths, when you renew on that 15th period, it's effectively an upsell based on price, because you're now going to 12s. We will give you credit for that, when it hits, if you're an employee and things like that. It's almost like a contracted ramp, which would be like the technical term. Miraculously, though, reps are more focused on today than they are on next year and making their number today. And so the management, and a lot of those deals went away, right? The power of no is really, really powerful, right? And you might get an argument at the beginning because you're taking away a behavior, but a quarter later, nobody remembers. They're just like, God, I want to do that because I don't get that full ARR. No, and that's like one example, and that's a pretty pervasive problem that I see across different companies.
Yeah, and one thing I want to jump in on there, it sounds like classification and definition is of utter importance. Then you have to enforce it. So there's a governance and data quality thing. The thing that I would love to touch on are your perspective on granularity, because what we see is it's not just a new business to renewal anymore. It's a new business to expansion multiple times over, or midterm changes. And this is like a fluctuating customer journey, which I can imagine that a land and expand motion makes this terrible. So I'm just curious how you think about that and that emergence really as a mechanism of like LTV being really, really important. How do you think about this in this paradigm and really making sure that that works properly?
Yeah, and I can't say we're perfect at it here at Freshworks either. So again, you said definitions are really important at the very beginning. So I agree. And these things need to be built into your comp plan. So we spent a lot of time defining like, what is ACV, right? What is ARR? And so that you can point to something to have that backup, right? Because at some point it becomes a legal argument too. On expansion in particular, that one's really interesting, because you have, like, if you are in the middle of a term or even towards the end of a term, and say you have more annual based customers, and your expansion is really a full ARR. And I think I love to take things to extremes, right? And then you can have arguments around things based on the extreme. If a customer had bought for a year and they bought for $365,000 in ACV, and they do an expansion on the last day of the contract, right? And essentially they expand for $1,000 on that last day of the contract. Technically, that's another $365,000 in ARR, right?
Right.
That 1 day and 1,000, right? So are you going to allow that rep to close a deal for $1,000, but get them $365,000 in ARR, where the next day that customer could churn, right? And this is a hard problem, because especially if you have customers who are expanding all the time, and one rule is, okay, proration. If you buy something, you have to prorate to, the billing term, but you also are committing to whatever contract you're on. If you signed a 3-year deal, you're now committing to, if it's 6 months in, 2.5 years for this expansion. So I'm a big fan of that.
So basically what you're really saying is that having granular details about each line item on the transaction and what happened is going to give you optionality. It's going to let you have those rules that you were saying that we have clear definitions, but we also have some flexibility around what we do, because we don't really want to disincentivize the rep from upselling, maybe not the last day, but in the last 2 months. We may want to incent them to get the ARR up, but we also don't want to not know that we have a contract that really only delivered us $1,000 worth of revenue and churned the next day. Like from a systems point of view, you're really saying the granularity is feeding your flexibility of having work with people. Is that
the order deals are so important, right? And not even just think about just if you want to enable your rep, your whole go-to-market group, or even your customers to have any type of religion, like you need them to be able to log in. What's the current ARR? What do they subscribe to? Right? What a pro rate should be. And if not, you're going to have a small army of people in the background who are going to, effectively be doing this. And if you're going to destroy your entire sales, I totally agree with you. And then that granularity also allows you to do rules. So I'm a big fan. Yes, you sign a contract for 3 years. If you upsell during that time, you got to commit to the next 3 years. But even more around comp, like you're right, you don't want to disincent that rep to do that, but you actually don't want to really pay him on it either, or her. The thing, so like at one point in Zuora, we got to a thing, and I'm going to say exceptions are always there. But if you are a customer and you are on an annual contract and you buy in that last quarter, we would effectively give you the stub for whatever the annual, and then we'll give you a bill for the whole next year that included that upsell and whatever your other base was. So when you did that upsell, you were committing to say another 14 months, right? If it's in the last 2 months. And that way you eliminate that churn risk right at the end. Otherwise, that exception is like, we might let you sell that little stuff, but we're not going to give you full ARR credit, right? Because our whole comp.
Get them early renewed.
Revenue.
If you want to get comped, get them early renewed so we know the dollar's real.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the other option was to reset their term, right? You could reset their term so they've had 2 months left. You reset and they're not a new 12-month term.
Right.
There's so many devil in the details on this for those expansion motions. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, what is my white space? What is the relationship of what customer to product, opportunity for different products, relationship between the products themselves? And, we see a lot of friction on multiple systems trying to get this data from one team to the next team, from sales to CS to finance. And where do you see the most challenge to getting to this level of granularity and in terms of systems? And just curious your anecdotal thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a central system that could be your system of record, right, then number one, you're going to rely on a lot of manual stuff, but then you're going to have to put a bunch of stuff together, and you're going to be pulling it from a bunch of different systems. And that's not ideal by any means. In fact, it's an impediment to growth at the end of the day, because, the more work you need to get to the core fundamental data, the less actionable it gets, right? Which is that it's got to be available. First, that's not even available. In that case, you got to do a lot to get it. It could still be available. It's not just automated. The second, rep has to understand what third has to be actionable. And if you don't have a place where, say, your reps can go and understand what a current state of a customer is, and then be able to have a conversation with that customer because they came inbound and they want something, or you got something to go sell to them, but you can't really articulate what it's going to cost them and things like that. It just becomes this iterative process that slows down your go-to-market motion. And that's where, that it's frustrating, right? And, I've seen this at every company, but, at Freshworks, we have this as well, that we're constantly fixing. But it's frustrating because that's not what you're doing as a business. That's not what you're selling. That's not the value prop to the customer. It just becomes an impediment to what you actually want to spend your time on. And the CFO and the CIO's job is to really, hey, how can you streamline things and enable the business to go do what it's supposed to be doing? It's a lot. It's a lot easier said than done.
I'm curious, like in that sort of systems challenge, what metrics do you see that are particularly hard to get to? Your top, that metric, and it's going to require some lift. What are the hard ones?
Well, I mean, the most important metric, which is ARR, is not an easy metric. And we just talked about definitions of ACV, the complexity of FX, for example. I had a deal once at Zuora where a rep is closing, and I owned sales ops for a while at Zuora. We kind of built a team. We always ordered, kind of like deal desk and order management, because that is a lot around constructs of deals, but also making sure that you get the data. Only, I mean, there was people that were really good at their jobs who owned it much better than I am. We had a deal in Australia once that there's a great upsell. The rep had done an amazing job, and we had our ARR was in USD. We braced forward this deal, and we looked at it. At the time, we were not marking deals to market unless a transaction happened. And I mean, like, as an upsell happened, well, we got to go record this as US, see what the impact. That upsell, because FX had changed so much, and this was early on in Zuora, that upsell actually still resulted in a downsell. And so, the way the comp stuff was written at the time is that was going to be on the rep, which made no sense at all, right? That the rep had done a really good job. Meaning that, okay, the way we were recording here, we were not recording in local currency. So that immediately caused us, said, we're doing something wrong here. We need to have like 4 different streams of ARR, or 5, but we're AUD, EUR, GBP, USD, like every currency that we were selling in had to be its own ARR stream, because the transactions are happening against that currency. And then the translations, like a balance sheet translation, was at any point in time, what is the exchange rate, right, of those different things to get to what our corporate ARR is. You think about that, like, those are complex problems that actually can lead to behavioral changes, and they're not as simple. So when we talk about systems, like being able to design that stuff very early on, Mark, you said, okay, well, it's too early. That one we had to do early, and actually we had to solve for it later, right? And that stuff will catch up to you over time. So you don't want to create so much complexity in the business that it's not understandable, but you do want to, at least at the foundation, have the data available that you can actually implement these changes when you feel they're necessary.
So I guess the answer is not to overbuild a system, but choose the right system, the right underpinning, so that you'll be able to adapt to those situations when you come up. Like, you don't have to plan for multi-currency when you're focused on your US core market, and that's 95% of your customers, and this is going to be a marginal thing. But if you are doing an EMEA strategy, or if that's ever going to be part of your future, it would be a good, important thing to think about that when you're selecting your systems at the beginning. Is really the message.
Yeah, I mean, and that like the best example there is like, hey, if I in a company had not recorded each transaction in euro from the very start, and I actually translated it to USD and recorded that in whatever system I was using, I actually wouldn't even know what the euro stream is, right? Because that thing had changed, right? So at the foundation, okay, just make the extra effort, that little bit of extra effort to set it up correctly. You can always change what you're going to do with that data, but if you don't have the data, it's going to be really hard to go recreate it. And so it's never too early to do that. But what you said just earlier too, don't over-engineer stuff. The whole goal is like, how do you actually mask all this from the folks who are getting their jobs done? So it's in the background, it's available, it's there. They don't need to understand how the sausage is made. You just want to make sure that, as the CFO or whoever is in charge of all that, like, it's actually happening and it's clean, and then you can go use it later.
Yeah, that's something we say all the time here at New. You shouldn't be hiring your sales reps to do math. If they have to do math, to prorate, to co-term, to even to meet discount objectives, then you are probably optimizing for the wrong people. And
so you want your customers, right?
And for the customers, if the customer's looking at it, they don't understand what the hell just happened. That's going to cause some friction, right?
Totally agree.
So we have covered a lot of ground. If you were going to give, say, a Series B company, to CFO to Series B company, the advice on the number one thing that, without even seeing them, that you're walking in and you were saying, the first question you had sitting down with the CFO of a Series B company and saying, okay, what I'm most interested in finding about what you're on top of, what are the 1, 2, 3 things in today's market that you're going to ask them to be, you're going to expect them to know and expect them to be able to explain to you if you were a board member or advisor or just popping in to look at them? What are those 3 things?
Well, first of all, I'd ask them, what are the 2 or 3 key things that you're driving, because I'm talking to a CEO, your company towards me, like a metric, right? And then ask why. And then if they couldn't cleanly, really simply explain it, and then tell me how they're trying to drive behavior internally, and say it's too complex. So my advice would be like, simplify, just simplify, and repeat, right? Because it's a company of that size, it has to be something that is so easy to understand and so actionable. And then one you can measure period over period over period. And I've been at companies like even before Zuora, like we just change a metric every single board meeting, right? It's like, oh, look over here. And the next board, oh, look over here, right? And that's so dangerous because you never actually make progress on anything. You're restarting every single time you do that. And so that doesn't mean that you can't pick something different if you decide what you chose in the beginning is now you're in a new phase of the company, right? Or something like that, or you pivoted. But the whole dogs chasing cars, which I like, so, oh, there's a car, right? It just doesn't work for a company. So simplify, focus, and repeat. That's what I would say.
Great. Well, that was awesome. Kate, do you have any other questions?
No, it was great to have you, Tyler. Would love to have you back again. We could pick your brain on even more deep questions, but on metrics, but appreciate the time. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
No, I really enjoyed it. You guys, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tyler. Really interesting. Thank you.